Dalton, I have
Yes,
something to
ma'am.
propose. You know Courtney, right?
Yes.
Do you want to let her up? Because I think that she's very well versed. I give her that, and because it seems like she may be able to help Sean.
Sure. Yeah, we can bring her up.
That'd be nice.
Because I want to hear
Um,
the conversation. Because I know Courtney is very well versed at this stuff.
oh,
Hi,
that's nice.
Courtney. Good to see you again.
Hey, friend, how are you?
Hello.
I'm doing fantastic.
Yeah, I've seen you around a little bit here and there. I just wanted to check on you, see how you're doing. I haven't seen you personally live in a minute, so I wanted to pop in.
Oh yeah, I took 9 months off.
Goodness,
That's a
devotion
long
there.
time.
Yeah, it takes real devotion to like not open this app. So I commend you for that. This app is
Courtney,
yeah, sorry.
just so I can like just do what I do for every single guest, I ask the same three questions of every single one of my guests. Are you at least 18 years old?
Yes, sir.
Are you a Bible believer?
I am.
And what pronouns should we refer to you as?
She definitely her.
All right, fantastic. So Courtney, what points would you like to introduce into the conversation?
Well, actually, I wasn't planning on coming up, but I think Ashlyn wanted me to. I was just hanging out in the chat.
I thought it would be a good conversation because I know how well versed you are, and honestly, half the time all we get are incoherent rambling. So to have someone that I know knows their Bible well is
Which is
just
not describing you, Sean. Just so we're clear.
yeah, no, no, no,
Yeah, I
no,
thought I was
no.
being attacked.
Sorry, no, no, no. You're not incoherent. You're just not as well versed as Courtney would be.
Yeah,
I
I
would
mean,
love to know
we've
those things.
he and I've spoken quite a few times on some of these subjects back when he was Catholic, and then like Messianic, and then like Noahide. And I don't think I've spoken to you since you transitioned to atheism, have I?
Uh, I don't think so. Not that I can think of. I don't
Yeah.
think me and
So,
you have actually spoken in like maybe 2 years or something like that.
oh gosh, really? Has it been that long?
I think so.
So this app really is a black hole then, because I've lost track of time because I would not have put it at 2 years. But yeah, I think the last time we spoke, you were I think you were Catholic at that time. So has that been 2 years?
Yeah, it's been
Uh,
about 2 or 2.5 years.
oh wow. Okay. Well, man, you just aged me a little bit more. But anyways, no, I'm just here, Sean. If you're if you're interested in learning more about why it is that some of us, like myself, I'm a Messianic, still believe in Jesus as the Messiah, you can. The answers that he's given are the standard kind of answers for Judaism. So nothing that he said has been like, left field or like crazy. It's either going to be your standard critical scholar, academic answer, which is why he refers to it as second Isaiah, or it's going to be like your standard Jewish, like the non-believing Jews that don't believe in Jesus answer. Again, all pretty on par for those groups of people. So, but if you want to study the other side of that, you can. So that's my thoughts. I don't really have anything to add. I'm sorry. I don't.
Oh, you're
Why
fine,
should
Courtney. I
I
mean,
believe in
you
the
didn't.
Bible?
Yeah, I was say you don't if you didn't really request to come, so don't feel like you need to be like forced or anything you don't want to talk about.
Yeah,
I don't
Yeah,
want
well,
to
I
pressure
mean,
you.
it's not that. I don't really. I mean, we've spoken so many times about it, so I don't really like. We would just be saying the same thing again. To answer the prompt, why should I believe in the Bible? I personally think. Wait, I would guess I would have to. When you say the Bible, you mean specifically the text, or do you mean like the religion that comes from the text, like specifically?
Yeah, just the text. Like, why should I believe that the content of the Bible comports to reality?
Um, Comports to reality. Like miracles, you mean? Something like that of
Or
miracles?
or even like the historical factors, like like for example the nativity stories of Jesus.
Um, I mean, I don't really know how to answer that in light of why should you believe anything? And the reason why I say that is because
you obviously believe in some things, some texts, some books, some things that you didn't witness, some things that you weren't there for, but yet you put some sort of stock in that expertise. I think it would be the same, to have that same kind of faith in that. Now, granted, miracles by necessity would not be something that would be like repeatable and sometimes not observable. And if you're asking if you should believe in miracles, I think miracles do happen. They're not common. It's quite literally the ontology of a miracle that it doesn't happen all the time. That's kind of the point. And there are things that we've discovered today that ancient humans wrote about. There was just this one condition that just came across my For You page. It was, and you guys might know more about it, that fellow that has the hair. He looks kind of like, and this is not to be disrespectful to this person, I just don't know how to describe it. He kind of looks a bit like Chewbacca.
I don't spend a lot of time on like TikTok watching videos on this kind of topic. I watch silly videos on TikTok mostly, so I have no idea who you're talking about.
Well, anyway, it's a documented condition. No one really truly knows like how it happens. They've, tested and ran some stuff, but the ancient people, there are some ancient documents about that.
Oh wait, are you referring to like people who, I think Ashlyn probably knows what this is, like the people who have this like condition where they grow hair all over their bodies.
Correct. Like literally like how you would see Chewbacca, how he has hair on his forehead, his cheeks, his chin, and it's not just the hair on his head. I forget the name of the condition that the science community has named it.
It's all over his body. Yeah.
I believe it's heratoism.
Hyper,
trichosis.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That might be it. But like we have ancient, but like it's not super common, but like science community says like one in however many. And so like we have people in the ancient times that wrote about or drew pictures of people like this. So it's like, would we have believed in those things happening had we not seen this fellow on TikTok and we know that he has, had his blood draws and tests and all of this? I don't know. I mean, I seriously, I probably wouldn't. I'd be like, I don't know, maybe someone was tripping on mushrooms.
I'm not super concerned with the miracles of the Bible because it's like no one's ever going to be able to like demonstrate whether or not they're real or false. But it's more like, for example, the fact that according to the Gospels, and I've kind of already hinted at this, that according to the Gospels, Jesus was born at two different periods of time. One Gospel makes the claim that he was born under Herod the Great, while the other makes the claim that he was born during the census of Quirinius.
Yeah, so if you're asking, like, have there ever been either textual variants or errors, as some people would even call them? Yeah, for sure. I think humans do that. I mean, scrolls wither away, and when they rewrite, and we see this just through history, like in Jewish, if you're very familiar with Jewish history, maybe others aren't, but they would reuse scrolls. I mean, guys, scrolls were very expensive to actually make them. And so they would literally, the idea of blotting out, as you see in the Bible, like blot out my sins, Isaiah 53. And
I would point out that every single gospel manuscript we has bears this like contradicting story. That one gospel places Jesus' birth around 64 BCE, and one places it around 6 CE, 10 years later, and there is
no, I know. I'm saying, well, here's the thing. What I always ask is, why would we trust a source on one thing as far as dating for these figures, but we wouldn't trust another source? So there's going to be contradictory sources. In the same way, like go ahead.
Well, so, for example, you cannot have like a foreign governor like Quirinius, who was the governor of Syria, taxing the people of Judea. If that would have been Herod's job if they were around at the same time. The only reason Quirinius was even governor of Syria in the first place was because of the fact that Judea was annexed to Rome, and the only reason it was annexed to Rome was because Archelaus was deposed from his position, and the only reason Archelaus was ever ethnarch of Judea in the first place was because his father Herod had already died.
Right. So whenever you ask the question, so you believe, I guess it's man-made, quote, man, or man fabricated or whatever.
The nativity stories?
You personally, do you believe that?
Yeah, I think the nativity stories, both of them are utterly fabricated in order to like get Jesus to be born in Bethlehem.
Now I have a question. Why theoretically would it have to do that? So if we're going to fabricate something, why should we say like, oh, we're going to just create this when we could have just left it out? Like theoretically, we could have just said specifically he was born in Judea or
Yeah.
in Beit Lechem.
Ma-
Like we wouldn't have to associate it with the leader of the time. We could theoretically just leave that out.
Yeah, so Matthew, I don't know why Matthew wants to place, Matthew comes before Luke. Matthew, for whatever reason, wants to place Jesus' birth during the reign of King Herod the Great. Possibly because he thinks it would be like, maybe because he thinks that it would be a good, maybe it's because, he's Herod's a king of Israel, and another king coming around poses like a threat to him, which would create a reason for like the children of Bethlehem to be killed off, which Matthew seems to think is a fulfillment of a prophecy in Jeremiah 31. Now, our oldest gospel, being Mark, has Jesus as being Jesus of Nazareth. And for whatever reason, we know that Matthew wrote his gospel explicitly because he wants to convince Jewish people that Jesus is the Messiah and the fulfillment of prophecy. So he has to find a way for Jesus to be born in Bethlehem. And for some other and we don't know why, but for some other reason, Luke chooses a different reason for Jesus to be born in Bethlehem altogether.
Yeah. So I guess I know what you mean colloquially whenever we say Matthew wrote for a Jewish audience. That's just a kind of a faith-based statement that we all kind of make. I've made it. I continue to make it. But if we're really pressing the idea, like we don't know that. Matthew doesn't explicitly state in his writings, like, or whoever we believe wrote Matthew. I know you probably don't think it was Matthew. That's fine. He doesn't say, I am writing specifically for a Jewish audience so that you should know, blah, blah, blah. So when we make these statements, what we're doing is we're baking in presumptions that then we're going to use to base all of our other thoughts about why it is that Matthew did or did not, or Mark did or did not.
Then I'll rephrase it to say the author of Matthew seems to be a bit more concerned with demonstrating Jesus fulfilled prophecy than any other author.
I guess sure, in some ways, in other ways, not so much. Mark obviously has references to the Hebrew Bible that Jesus would fulfill or calls him specific things that would show that he fulfills that aspect. So does Matthew have a narrative that describes him as, yeah, for sure, as the Messiah, and that's a very Jewish thing, for sure. But does it mean that Mark doesn't or Luke doesn't, or I don't know. I mean, I would have to know what you mean per se by there.
Well,
like
the amount of time. So if we compare like the amount of times that the author of Matthew is quoting the Hebrew Bible to make a point about Jesus being the Messiah fulfilling prophecy compared to, like, say, Mark. Like Mark will, like, for example, tell the story of Jesus riding into Jerusalem like on a donkey. Never quotes any passage in the Hebrew Bible. But Matthew goes out of his way to say, and this was fulfilled, this happened or to fulfill was written by the prophet. Matthew does that more than any other author of the Gospels.
Sure, but I mean, you acknowledge that either, like I said. Hey, Sean.
John?
Oh shit, sorry.
That kind of threw me. What was I saying? So you acknowledge that you. I'm sorry. I think he was plunging his toilet. Like, I'm not even kidding.
We'll just assume he's plunging the toilet.
That was
Okay.
my pussy check. I'm so sorry.
So, so either directly or like indirectly, you would acknowledge either by title or speech in some way that Mark does, though, quote from the Hebrew Bible, though. I mean, even though it's not as much as Matthew. I mean, like, we know Psalm 110 is the most quoted passage in the New Testament. So we agree all of the authors quoted from it because that's where they're getting their authority specifically to state this thing about Jesus. But I guess I don't really find much, excuse me, close my office door. My kids are loud. I don't really find much stock in stating like, oh, this individual quotes from it more. I mean, sure, noted. But what does that really do for us whenever we're sitting down and we're going, yeah, but they all quoted from it. And it seems as though they all have a different.
All it tells me is that the author is a bit more concerned about quoting Hebrew Bible in order to demonstrate something about Jesus than the other ones are. That's it.
Right. But I mean, what does that really tell us other than
specifically either the author has a intent, and the intent may be to show like, here, look, this is the fulfillment of, whereas the other is more or less saying, yeah, here's the fulfillment, but here's what happened. So if you're saying by doing that, it's like Mark or Matthew is forcing Jesus into a text where he otherwise would not have been, I don't see that as being the case.
No, I'm just saying that the oldest gospel being Mark tells us that Jesus was from Nazareth. Never mentions him being born in Bethlehem. The authors of Matthew and Luke are having to concoct stories about how Jesus could possibly be born in Bethlehem in order to fit the idea that Jesus was born in Bethlehem.
Yeah, okay. So I don't really see it as a concoction. So I think those are more like inflammatory words. And I know from your perspective, it is a proper use of the word. I wouldn't use that word. And the reason why I wouldn't, because I don't know the intent. In order to use the word concoct, I would have to know the intent.
Well, it can't be that they're reporting on true history, because
It could. I'll explain why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Jesus.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, do you think Jesus could have been born at 2 different times in 2 different decades?
Well, the decades part where we're discussing specifically whether or not we're going to trust one source over the other. But when we're talking about why it is that a single individual is called by either 2 different names or 2 different locations, that isn't extraordinary to me. We have numerous people that would be identified by their father's house in history. And we have numerous people that would otherwise be identified specifically by the location that they lived or even location that they were from, i.e. born. So that's not really interesting to me, especially in light of the fact that Mark, or in this case, Matthew, he's trying to display a specific quality about Jesus that Mark might not have been. And that doesn't, to me, scream initially like, oh, it's concoction, it's concoction. It just screams that they had different, like one's duty is to show one thing where the other is like, yeah, that's great. I don't really care as much about that. You get what I mean?
I would say that you could either have it that either Matthew is telling the truth about Jesus being born in Bethlehem, or Luke is telling the truth about Jesus being born in Bethlehem, or they could both be wrong, but I don't think that there's any scenario in which they're both correct.
Specifically because Mark has him calling him something different? I don't know.
Because Matthew has Jesus being born around 64 BCE, and then the Gospel of Luke has him being born 10 years later. And this isn't just one historical document that I'm trusting for this. I got 2 independent sources that would place like the census of Quirinius much later than Herod's death.
No, I understand. I'm saying when we're discussing why it is that he's of Nazareth or however you prefer to say it, versus of Bethlehem, that in and of itself is not a problem, right? For you?
Well,
or is it?
For me, I don't think Jesus was born in Bethlehem at all. I think that all the data seems support that he was from Nazareth, and that he was only known as being from Nazareth. And because of a mistaken reading of Micah 5:2, the author of Matthew believes he has to be born in Bethlehem, because we know the author of Matthew is not above like making things up about Jesus in order to fulfill prophecy, given like, for example, making Jesus ride into Jerusalem on 2 donkeys because he thinks that's exactly what the prophet said.
Again, I wouldn't say it's making it up. I know you're going to use that verbiage because that's what you think. So like, I mean, Jesus is like noted as like the Galilean. I mean, is that problematic as well for you?
No, because Nazareth is in Galilee.
Right.
Bethlehem is in Judea.
I'm sorry, what now? I cut you off.
And Bethlehem is in Judea.
No, I understand. But what I'm saying is specifically, whenever he's noted as that, it's not a problem because it's specifically addressing an era or a time in one's life. Like if I'm noted as like Courtney from like Alabama versus Courtney from Florida, because I've lived in both locations, is that a problem?
Well, I would say that the reason that the nativity stories just simply aren't real is because they contain like historical problems and errors, and therefore we don't have any reason to think that these nativity stories are relating true history.
I hear you, but I'm not really addressing that. I'm addressing like the differences in why Matthew focuses on calling him one specific thing versus Mark or Luke, and the reason why I think that's important, and why it's not really interesting to me that they would do that. That they would call him like of Galilee or Nazareth.
No,
or,
to be sure, all four Gospels say that Jesus is Jesus of Nazareth. It's just Matthew and Luke who go out of their way to create these stories about Jesus being born in Bethlehem. Mostly Matthew, because he thinks that Messiah has to be born in Bethlehem.
Right. And I'm saying I don't see that as an issue in light of what it is that Matthew is specifically trying to accomplish for his writing, or whoever, again, you believe. Is it okay if I just say Matthew, even though?
Yeah, it's fine to just say it's fine to say just Matthew.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. It's not a problem for me. People do this all the time. They say it's a problem. I don't see it as a problem. And the reason why I wouldn't is because when these authors are writing, they're writing for specific goals. Like in my book, as I'm writing, I just suppose that my audience, which is my primary audience, knows specific things already. And so I'm not going to necessarily fill in the gaps with every little detail. Otherwise my book would be huge, right? And so those things aren't problems for me, whereas they're problems for other people. I just don't find it very interesting, is what I mean. And the reason why I think Matthew is rightly noted as speaking more to a Jewish audience, because he does pull out a lot of these very Jewish ideas for the Messiah, and specifically, quote, origins at Bethlehem or Bethlehem. And I think that's why he focuses on that. Now, you would say, well, given the data points that we have, it would seem to me that Matthew is just making that up. But, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I could say that the events mentioned in the Gospel of Matthew, we have no historical basis for believing it ever happened, like Herod massacring all the children in Bethlehem. We have no evidence to suggest that this ever actually happened. And
I have a question.
And again,
what kind of evidence would you suppose that you would have?
I would suppose that some sort of historian would have remarked on Herod massacring a bunch of infants. I mean, Josephus was no fan of Herod and constantly talked about all the horrible things he did, and yet never mentions him wiping out a bunch of children in a village in Judea.
Do you think Josephus was a fan of Jesus?
Of Jesus? I don't think he was either a fan or not a fan of Jesus, but like he doesn't have to mention Josephus doesn't have to mention Jesus. All he could have mentioned was that for whatever reason, King Herod massacred a bunch of children in Bethlehem.
Yeah, what I mean though is, do you think that given the data points that we have on Jesus, do you think that Josephus could have written more about Jesus himself?
I don't think Josephus had any reason to write about Jesus. He wasn't all that popular of a figure in the first century.
He was the single most important Jew at that time. He caused quite an uproar. I think it was very, and he still is today.
I don't think he really caused. I don't really think he caused an uproar, because I don't consider the Gospels be anything other than myth about Jesus. I don't think Jesus was really all that big of a figure in the first century.
Okay, wait. When you say myth, are you a mythicist, or do you believe?
No, I think there was a historical Jesus, but the stories about him in the Gospels are myth about Jesus.
Okay. So I guess what I'm saying is, like, what evidence would you personally hold to that says this is the reason why I don't think Josephus would write very much about Jesus? I mean, he writes about the Christians, specifically about people that...
He writes a little bit about the Christians. He doesn't write a lot about them.
Right. But yet he doesn't really ascribe much detail to Jesus himself. So you mean to tell me this not very popular individual Jesus, who caused people to be called, quote, Christians as we historically know them, Josephus will write a bit about them, but not really remark much on the actual, quote, cult leader, Jesus himself?
All he says about Jesus, he only talks about Jesus' crucifixion, and that's it.
Right. So if Jesus individually is not an important Jew, why did Josephus find it to be so important to mention him and his crucifixion as opposed to any other crucifixion of any other Jew?
Right. He was mentioning Jesus' crucifixion during the time of he was talking about Pilate's tenure as procurator of Judea, and then mentions that he crucified Jesus. As to why he brought up Jesus, that's actually a good question. That's actually a very interesting question. I don't know.
Yeah, I think that in and of itself kind of gives us reason to, I don't want to say doubt, but reason to express, it seems as though it's some sort of, I don't want to say polemic. What's another word? Instead of saying polemic, maybe controlled narrative in a way. That might be a bit too, I don't know how to say it.
Too much of a conspiracy theory?
Not necessarily controlled narrative. I mean, that happens. We know people do that. I mean, left side accuse Trump of that, right side accuse Biden of that. I mean, that's just the way that it is in life. People with power tend to control narratives. I don't think that that's a conspiracy theory at all. I think that's just the nature of humans.
But okay. So just to be very clear, though, just because it seems like we're kind of a bit all over the place. I don't hold the Gospels to be reliable because we don't know who wrote them. We don't know where they get their information, and they do contain narratives that are in conflict with each other, which is why I don't think that they're reporting on the true history of Jesus of Nazareth.
No, I understand, but I'm saying in light of, well, you not being a mythicist, I'm glad that you clarified because I was going, oh my gosh, I did not know that you were a mythicist. I tend to not really even engage with
I'm currently investigating the mythicist proposition right now. I'm reading one of Dr. Richard Carrier's books, and I will decide in the next 6 months whether or not I buy into his very specific hypothesis or not.
Gotcha. So I guess what I mean is it just seems to me that with Jesus being popular enough to create what is commonly referred to as Christians today and at that time specifically, which was a derogatory term, and we know that he writes about the crucifixion, it would just seem to me that he should have written more about it. I mean, because he doesn't really write or care much about any other Jew that was crucified. Not really. So, and we know there were zealots of the time, so there were definitely leaders of zealots that he could have wrote. You know, it just doesn't seems a bit like a controlled narrative to me, if I'm just going to be honest. I don't really know how to say it without it sounding so inflammatory. I'm not trying to be inflammatory, but that's kind of what it seems like to me in light of all of the other points I mentioned.
I mean, I think all we really have as far as the date is concerned is that Josephus writes a lot about Herod the Great, and he doesn't need to mention Jesus when he mentions that Herod murdered a bunch of babies in Bethlehem.
No, I understand. But if Matthew is correct, then it would necessitate proof for Jesus and Jesus as the Messiah. And the reason why this would be the case, let's look at it. Why did he, according to Matthew, why would he have unalived all of those babies? According to Matthew.
Yeah, according to Matthew, why would he unalive those babies? Because he was fearful of a future king.
That's right. And it is assumed in the narrative that Jesus is the fulfillment of that king.
Yeah, assumed. I would have a lot mention with that, and I don't think Matthew quotes any of the prophecies in those first two chapters correctly. I don't think like the three wise, not three, but just the wise man, the magi coming from the east, following a star to Judea, and then following that same star back to Bethlehem, and the fact that there's no historical account of Herod ever killing the infants, and the fact that also it completely disagrees with what Luke says about Jesus' birth. All of this would lead me to be very skeptical, and I have no good reason to believe any of this is true.
Right. No, I understand that, but I'm saying if we're looking at why it is that he wrote about wrote about the people more than Jesus per se, and yet Jesus is, I believe, quite a prominent Jew of the time. You said you don't think so, and I asked, well, what would be the counter for that? Since Josephus doesn't really care much about any of the other Jews that were crucified, he specifically spends a lot of time addressing, and I say a lot of time in comparison to the Jews that he doesn't mention, because I mean, many Jews were crucified. This is not a unique thing to Jesus himself, but it just doesn't make sense. And that's why I say it seems like a controlled narrative. And the reason why it's controlled narrative, or I believe so, is because mentioning this specific thing that Matthew does about the unaliving of children is what? It would ultimately be proof for Jesus's messiahship. If Matthew is correct.
But Josephus doesn't need to reference that. All he has to say is that, right. And then Herod, out of jealousy, murdered a bunch of infants in Bethlehem. He wouldn't need
Right.
to mention
But
the reason for it.
right. But if Josephus himself, just first of all, does not believe that Jesus is the Messiah, and he gives over connotations in his writing that Jesus is the reason that Herod was jealous, then it would, I think this is why it's a control narrative, because then it would logically follow that if that is the case, then this event did happen, and that Herod himself was fearful of Jesus, which would substantiate Jesus's lineage and every other thing that came thereafter in the book of Matthew.
I,
Do you
I think
understand?
that's too much of a stretch for me. I mean, I think that Josephus could have just easily have written about it without having mentioned Jesus whatsoever. I see no reason for not.
Yeah, but if correct, he could have. But what would that have done for the Jews of the time and also himself? I mean, he would be blatantly just disagreeing with God, essentially, because here is this case where the Messiah has now come, and yet all of them, including Josephus, rejected the Messiah. Yet Josephus just writes about the very proof that Jesus is the Messiah.
Well, that wouldn't be proof that Jesus was Messiah. It would prove that Herod was, because again, Herod is apparently according to the story going based off of what the wise men are saying and based on what the scribes are saying. But I don't think the scribes were necessarily correct in their interpretation in that story. And again, Josephus wouldn't need to mention anything about Jesus because he just mentions all the failings and the moral failings of Herod the Great. He doesn't need to tell why Herod murdered a bunch of kids. He could just mention it without having to say anything about why he did it.
No, I hear you. And I guess what I'm asking is, can you give me a reason why it wouldn't logically follow? Because that kind of forces us into Jeremiah 31. And when it forces us into Jeremiah 31, you would be a fool of your time to reject the Messiah that God has now sent, according to Jeremiah.
Jeremiah doesn't say anything about Bethlehem children being murdered.
No, it specifically addresses the voices heard in Ramah, weeping and great mourning.
Which has nothing to do with children being murdered.
Can you give me a good reason to believe that?
Because the context of Jeremiah 31 is about the exiles.
Right. But what is the context of Jeremiah overall? The context of Jeremiah is the Redeemer, which redeems from the exile.
I mean, from the Babylonian exile, Jesus didn't
No,
redeem
from
anyone
the greatest, let me be more specific, from the greatest exile of the Jewish people, which is the ultimate fulfillment. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I would say that that's not what Jeremiah doesn't talk about some greater exile other than the Babylonian exile. I don't think, I don't see that anywhere.
Yeah, so I would just say that that's where we're going to just disagree fundamentally, because Jeremiah 31 kind of gives you a bird's eye view of not only Israel's history of the past and the exile, but also Israel's history in return. You can clearly see that's the point in Jeremiah 31, quote 31, right? Where the new covenant is made, and the new covenant is specifically, hold on, son, just 1 second. What is that?
My glasses. Did she not tell you?
No, but you'll have to talk to your dad about that. I'm on the phone right now. I'll be off in 5 minutes. I'm sorry, I'll have to go in about 5 minutes. My son's glasses apparently are broken into shattered pieces. Jeremiah 31 specifically launches us into the future. So what is this redemption in this, quote, new covenant? If only the Babylonian exile is specifically what is being...
Also the Assyrian exile of the northern house of Israel.
Wait, could you do me a favor? Could you please address the person in the chat? The one thing I don't like is the people comment about my children.
Oh yeah, no one. Don't comment about the children. It doesn't matter. Just ignore the comments. That's
no,
my
I know
that's,
that, but it's just I think it's disgusting for people to pretend as though, one, my husband is in the other room. Second, it's not irrelevant.
Yeah,
it's disgusting for people to bring children into the mix.
No one make any comments about the children, please. It's quite irrelevant to the conversation. I'm sure everything's taken care of over there. When we read Jeremiah 31, verse 15, we have here, it says, "Thus saith Yahweh, a voice is heard in Ramah, lamentation and bitter weeping." But the bitter weeping is not from anyone other than Rachel, because it says Rachel is weeping for her children. She refuses to be comforted for her children because they are not. What does it mean that they are not? Does it mean they're killed?
I.e.
No, it
that
means that they're carried away in the exile.
Yeah, and what happens when you go into exile and you never return?
But they did return.
Not all of Israel returned.
No, this is referring to the Babylonian exile, this passage.
Do you believe that every person, every soul that left returned, or did some die?
Some may have died in Israel, but we read in the
Right.
following verse, thus saith the Yahweh, keep your voice from weeping and your eyes from tears, for your work shall be rewarded, says Yahweh, and they shall come back from the land of the enemy. This is clearly just talking about the return of the exiles from the land of the enemy. And I'm just reading it plainly. I have no reason to read something deeper into it.
Yeah, I would definitely read something deeper into it, because that's the ultimate goal specifically of the Lord bringing forth. Where does the idea of the resurrection come from, and why do we have this idea?
Daniel comes from Daniel. And the reason that the idea of resurrection comes about is because the Jewish people started to see that a lot of their persecutors were getting away with injustice and the righteous were not being rewarded. So they had to develop a theology that would allow for an ultimate vindication of the righteous. So Daniel.
So where do you believe? Okay, sorry. So yeah, Daniel, where some will wake to everlasting damnation, some to everlasting life. Correct. So I know you said now the Jewish people just kind of fabricated this idea.
Speak, you sound like you're far away from the mic.
Can you hear me now?
You're very faint.
Hello?
Is it just me or is she very faint? Ashland?
No, she sounds fine to me.
Oh, everyone sounds faint. There's something wrong on my end. Just keep talking because I can hear you just fine. Good enough.
So I think now the skepticism is that, like, specifically the Jewish people did create the idea of this resurrection because they were looking for some sort of hope. But what we do have is that the Jewish people absolutely believed, based in the prophets, in a resurrection. And this resurrection is the redeeming of all redeeming, the final redemption. And so that's why it would be found in Jeremiah 31.
I don't see anything about it. The only prophet that I see, prophet speaking about resurrection is Daniel and no one else.
Well, I mean, I would disagree there, but I'm just asking specifically.
I think every other reference to quote unquote resurrection in for example, Isaiah talks about resurrection, but it's only about corporeal resurrection, like in Ezekiel 36 through 37, where the quote unquote resurrection is used as a symbol for the reconstitution or the ingathering of the lost exiles.
No, I understand. Like I said, because if I go into that, that's going to take us into another. I'd rather just stay in Jeremiah 31 because that's based in the conversation we were previously having about Matthew. So the reason why I think, basically, I'll wrap this up. The reason why I think that it would have been left out is because it would have forced us to read Jeremiah 31 and go, so the Redeemer does redeem us. Oh, go ahead.
I wasn't about to say anything.
Oh, I'm sorry. I heard something. Okay. So the Redeemer does redeem us. He redeems us from the ultimate enemy, which is ultimate death and sin. And specifically,
who is dead
sorry,
in this passage? Who is dead in this passage? Where does it say that where does it talk about people who are dead coming back?
So again, Rachel weeping for her children. When her children are carried off, do they all stay alive?
Well, no, because the exile lasted for many hundreds of years. But
correct.
But does the author seem to be insinuating that the coming back is coming back from death?
No, I do believe that. That's kind of what I'm trying to build up to here. So specifically, verse 16, this is what the Lord says: restrain your voice from weeping and your eyes from tears, for your work will be rewarded, declares the Lord. They will return from the land of their enemy. So there is hope for your descendants, declares the Lord. Your children will return to their own land. Now, I know you see this specifically only about the land, yet we have, again, future ideas from other prophets about what it means to be resurrected. Now, you say it's corporeal, i.e. that a person is going to revive Israel, right? That's ultimately what you believe it means.
Yeah.
But
Because the only like resurrection of like individuals from the dead is only found in Daniel.
Right, but that's what I'm saying. So instead of, without appealing to Jewish people made this up so they could have some sort of hope,
I would ask, why is it that you believe that without just saying that?
Because
I'd need to know.
I don't see it anywhere else in the text. The idea of like corporeal resurrection of individuals from the dead. I don't see that anywhere else in the Hebrew Bible.
Yeah, so it's called the light of life throughout the Hebrew Bible, if you'd like to look into that. But specifically, why do you think that the Jewish people only, like, if Daniel stood alone as a prophet in the idea of like a resurrection,
Well, to
do
be
you
clear,
not,
okay, go on. Never mind.
do you not think that would be a problem
No,
for the people?
because religions often like evolve and add new ideas over time. And the author of the book of Daniel, writing around the time of the Maccabean revolt, I mean, Greek Hellenistic ideas have already like permeated the Jewish people, and the idea of like creating like some sort of afterlife beyond just simply Sheol is not too big of a stretch. Religions
Yeah.
evolve all
So
the time
what?
and add new ideas.
But why is it that when dealing with just the text, this is why I always often like to stay within the text, because what I'll find that people will do is they'll appeal to something like what you were doing earlier with Sean. You were saying like, oh, specifically here's passages that the Messiah did not fulfill that he was supposed to fulfill. Isaiah chapter 2. But friend, you know it doesn't say anything about a Messiah there. Why
Oh
do you
yeah,
believe that?
I'll just say that most people know it's about the last days. Yes.
Correct, but why do you specifically using Isaiah there appeal to Isaiah? Is verse 2 or chapter 2 is speaking of a prophet, particularly the Messiah, when it doesn't mention anything about the Messiah in that chapter. So my
Because it's
question is,
about the
are you
last
appealing?
days, the Acharit Hayamim.
Correct. But are you appealing to Jewish literature and Jewish understanding here, but not for the idea of the resurrection of the dead?
No, I would just say that in the last days, that's when the Messiah comes.
How do you know
And
that?
that's because it's consistent with the rest of the prophets.
It's
Like
consistent with the rest of the prophets, which also speak of what?
well, only one prophet speaks about corporeal resurrection.
No, I'm saying it is, quote, it is consistent with the rest of the prophets. What is the it?
That when the Messiah comes in the last days.
Right. And the last days being what for the Jewish people?
The latter times.
No. I know that. But I mean, the last days specifically are what to the Jewish people? The redeeming of the final redemption?
Yeah, the ingathering of the exiles and the establishment of the Israelite monarchy.
Right. But all of the other, okay.
I think
The
you're looking for me
passages.
to like the idea of spiritual redemption from sin and all that, but no, I don't believe that's in the Hebrew Bible.
No, I know that you don't believe that it's in the Hebrew Bible, but the Jewish people do, for which you appeal to get your apologetics.
I
whenever you were
don't no,
using.
I don't always
Hold on one
appeal to
second.
the Jewish people for my apologetics. I just read the Bible and consider what it says. Sometimes the Jewish people are right in their interpretation. Sometimes I disagree with
Okay, but
Jewish apologists.
in Isaiah chapter 2, where in just Isaiah chapter 2, where do you get the idea of a Messiah here? Just Isaiah chapter 2.
Yeah, only in that it mentions that this takes place in the last days, and the prophets are always speak about the Messiah being in the last days.
So you appeal now to interpret Isaiah chapter 2. You have to appeal
To the
outside of
text.
Isaiah to other texts, which give you more nuanced view about how to interpret Isaiah 2.
Sure, because there's never a point in any of the prophets where the Messiah appears at any other point in history other than the last days.
Okay, so then one would do the same for Jeremiah 31, yes.
But nothing in Jeremiah talks about people being brought back from the dead.
But again, you wouldn't just use Jeremiah 31. You would appeal to outside scripture, or not outside scripture, outside sources, maybe Zechariah or Haggai or other prophets specifically to gain a better understanding of what this final
other-
redemption may look like. But
What are you
what
talking
I'm
about
getting
final
at,
redemption? This is just about the ingathering of the exiles.
which is known to the Jewish people as the final. And why do you think there are from Jews who specifically are like anti-Zionists? It's because they don't believe that Israel as it stands today is a biblical fulfillment of Israel. That's why they specifically wait for the Mashiach to bring them back in the ingathering and the resurrection of the dead to happen then. they are getting these passages not from one prophet, but from many prophets who pivot off of each other, which is why I say it seems to me you're using Jewish apologetics whenever it suits you, but then you go outside of that.
No,
whenever-
I'm just reading the text. I'm not appealing to Jewish apologetics. I don't spend my time listening to Jewish apologetics. I go to
Well, my friend, you
non-confessional
used to, though.
scholars. I used to. I
Right,
go
but
to
you used to.
non-confessional scholars, and I just read the text for what it plainly says, and I don't try to insert things that aren't there.
Right, but you used to, right? You would have to acknowledge that you
Yeah,
prior were Messianic,
but I
and
no
then
longer
you were Noahide.
do. But I no
But
longer
that
do.
informs your previous opinions, right?
No, I don't go by any dogma. I just go by what the data say.
So I guess this is where I would feel like it's not necessarily honest. And the reason why I say that is because the answers that you gave me then are the same answers that you're giving me now.
I disagree with the Jewish apologetics on many points as well.
That's fine, but on these texts.
You're literally only arguing from a Jewish apologetic position.
Who?
You're a Messianic Jewish person, aren't you?
I don't argue only from Jewish. What do you mean? I'm sorry. There are many Orthodox Jews that
from this entire side.
do what now?
That's all you've been arguing from. Dalton is explaining
No.
why he particularly cares for certain positions in certain Jewish beliefs, and explains why he takes this interpretation, and then explains elsewhere why he
Correct.
doesn't.
And what I'm trying to get you and him to understand is that to appeal to Isaiah 2 as being about the Messiah is problematic, because Isaiah 2 doesn't mention anything about a Messiah at all. Never, not once. So my question is, where are you getting that idea?
In
I'd
that
like to
it's
just have
mentioning that it's
answer.
in the. I've already answered that 3 times.
Okay, answer for me again.
The prophet says that this occurs in the last days, in the Acharit HaYamim. When does the Messiah come?
Which you would have to go to another prophet, another source to get that information, right?
Well, no, I could just appeal to Isaiah chapter 11.
Okay, another chapter specifically.
By the same
Does it
prophet?
specifically? Yeah, but does it specifically mention the Messiah there, my friend?
Well, no, it mentions the king. You'll never find a passage in the Hebrew Bible that refers to the final king as Hamashiach. But the text of Isaiah 11 does mention the descendant of Jesse, who would be the final king. Yes.
Yes, I believe that. But I believe that because I'm looking at all of the writings as a collective, which I'm showing that you're not doing.
No, I don't. I only appeal. Isaiah 11 is clearly about the future king. When we talk about the Messiah, we're colloquially speaking about that king. Yes.
Yes, colloquially, I am saying that same thing. However, when I get there because I'm utilizing the Torah, which specifically and directly does not mention the Messiah, right?
Correct.
It doesn't directly mention the quote King Messiah. In fact, the only king there is the God, right? And so
David.
then, and I was fixing to finish my statement. And then later you have David, because again, the idea is like, oh, God is your king. Fine. I choose David. And then from there, it rolls into Nach. The point that I'm getting at is that I am building my interpretation using all of the different writings. You specifically have built yours on like the idea of the Messiah from the Jewish.
Oh yeah, I don't assume that the Bible is universal.
Uh-oh, I can't hear you.
Yeah, I don't assume that the Bible is univocal, so I don't just because another prophet says something, like it's just because Daniel talks about corporeal resurrection, I don't really take that into consideration when reading Jeremiah.
Right, got you. So I guess why would you appeal to Isaiah 11? Because you could have something that's you could have non-univocal ideas found in the same author.
Yeah, you would just need to demonstrate that Isaiah 11 wasn't from the same author as Isaiah chapter 2.
No, that's not
Which
what
I
I
don't
just
think
said.
any
I said
scholar-
you could have non-univocal ideas, or quote contradictory ideas, as some would say, even within the same author. That's not unheard of. So I'm asking, whenever you're building, so you're just basically
Yeah, do
saying
we
at
have
this
any
point,
reason
I
to
don't
think
accept
that-
Daniel as a.
Do we have any reason to suppose that Isaiah 11 disagrees with Isaiah 2?
Well, it's not that it disagrees. Okay. Okay, here, I don't think that it disagrees. I'm saying we could have the idea. I'll give you an example, one that's famously cited, like Paul. Paul says out of one side of his mouth, you should keep the law, and out of the other side of his mouth, you don't have to keep the law, according to some interpretations of his very writings, right? You agree? Okay,
Yeah, sure.
So there is an example of a non-univocal idea, if you interpret it that way, of a non-univocal idea within the same author. So you appealing to Isaiah chapter 11 to interpret chapter 2, I think is flawed because you don't agree with univocality.
Yeah, so do I have any reason to think that there's anything that Isaiah 11 isn't univocal with Isaiah 2 in my interpretation? I don't see any reason to think that.
Well, again, do you agree with the idea that you're appealing to? You said, I don't agree with univocality.
I'm just reading. Yeah, I don't agree that univocality. When I talk about the fact that the Messiah is like hinted at in Isaiah chapter 2 is because Isaiah chapter 11 confirms this. And I don't have any reason to think that one chapter is disagreeing with the other.
Well, specifically, whenever you're talking about like the quote end times, as people would call it, and it speaks of like the banner, and then you have other, well, I mean, I would have to go to other prophets because Jeremiah also speaks of this banner. And when Jeremiah speaks of the banner, it's during the Babylonian exile period. So with you saying it's about the quote end times, which is how you're interpreting Isaiah chapter 2 to be about the Messiah, then that would have happened in, according to Jeremiah, the Babylonian exile.
But I don't necessarily would use Jeremiah to interpret Isaiah.
Well, then I think that's being inconsistent. And the reason why I say this is because why is it that you have these authors, specifically Jeremiah in his era, which also is roughly the same time kind of around Daniel. Why would you not
Wait,
look at
what was that? You think Jeremiah was written at the same time as Daniel?
No, I didn't say it was written at the same time. The era that it's speaking of, the writing specifically, it's addressing the same time. This is why when Daniel is trying to calculate the numbers, was Daniel chapter 10, God sends a prophet.
To be clear, I think Daniel was written in the 2nd century BCE.
Okay, say that again. Sorry.
I think Daniel was written in the 2nd century BCE.
Okay, so when you see two authors writing about the same events and they're not contemporary, what do you think of that?
I think each author brings to the table their own theology, their own ideas, and sometimes they'll agree with each other. Other times they'll disagree with each other. Which is why I don't generally use other authors to interpret other authors, unless I can demonstrate. For example, maybe I'll use something in the Hebrew Bible to interpret the New Testament only because the author of the New Testament is quoting from that prophet, and therefore they're drawing their ideas from that prophet.
Okay, but don't you think that it would be a bit odd for people that are not contemporaries to write about the same event or indirectly call something a banner, Banner, and yet not use that to inform why it is that they're talking about the same event? Maybe two people writing about 9/11, and then they speak about the word, quote, 9/11, which colloquially we all kind of know in America to be September 11th. Why would you not?
It would just tell me that the authors are from a similar culture and might have similar ideas and terminology, but it doesn't tell me that they share the same theology or ideas.
But this is specifically addressing a theological standpoint. That's what I'm trying to get you to see, friend. This is not this historical thing that happened. This is the banner is the Messiah, which according to the way that you're interpreting, you would have to have come at the Babylonian exile, but yet you're using Isaiah. Maybe. Hold on one second. And yet you're using this in Isaiah chapter 11 to interpret Isaiah chapter 2, which you explicitly said is in the quote latter days.
Yeah, I'm using Isaiah to interpret Isaiah. I'm not using Jeremiah to interpret Isaiah.
Which I think is problematic for the reasons I already listed.
But I don't assume that they all have the same theology or ideas or beliefs. Even if they might have a shared culture and might use similar terminology, doesn't mean that they're necessarily talking about the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, have no reason to believe that. That's what I'm saying. I don't feel convinced that there is a meaningful reason that one would mention the same theological event, not a historical event, but a theological event, and have
You
the
don't
same
think
shared
Isaiah
culture,
and Jeremiah
then
could
yet
have been
not believe the
drawing
same thing.
upon? You don't think Isaiah and Jeremiah could have been drawing upon a similar like tradition, yet having their own theological inputs?
No, but it's the same theological input. That's what I'm saying. And you just said that they could have the same shared culture, i.e., that they're Jews. I mean, that's not a problem. So it just seems odd to me that you would say, well, yeah, I'm going to look at like a cognate here. But I'm just going to assume that they had different theological positions, friend.
No,
That
no,
just
I
doesn't-
just don't assume. I just don't assume that they had the same theological beliefs.
So if they didn't have the same, they had the opposite, which would means different, right?
Well, no, it's not like a dichotomy. Like it's like exact like a spectrum where if he didn't hold to Isaiah's belief, he held the exact opposite. It just could have been a variation.
Different. I didn't say opposite, just different.
Sure, it could have just been different. I just don't
I
always
don't-
just assume from the get-go that if Isaiah believed a thing, that Jeremiah necessarily believed that same thing, even if they use similar language.
Yeah, I'm just not. I get it, but I'm just not seeing why you would believe that specifically. Like
That's how I treat every ancient text, regardless of whether it's the Bible or not the Bible.
Yeah, that just doesn't make, that makes zero sense. I mean, to say that they're both a Jew. Now, if one was like an American and one was a Jew, of course that would be different cultures, for sure.
No, I wouldn't even. I would hold the same standard if we were talking about Babylonian texts or Arabic texts.
Okay, either way, but like if you're looking at it from an academic standpoint, you say, forget the history. Like we're just not going to look at the history. We're going to look at the actual theology of each individual. In this case, would be Jeremiah and Isaiah, and they're utilizing the same phraseology, having the same theology backing it. Why would you?
Well, we don't.
personally assume?
We don't know it's the same theology backing it.
How would you not know? What would be the metrics that
Because
you would use?
Israel wasn't monolithic in their theology. Just because one prophet believes something doesn't mean that this was like the belief of all of Israel. Israel was a melting pot of ideas.
I could go to a
Yeah, but if you could just say that, then nothing's provable. I'm sorry.
Hold on. I could just go to a church around the corner where they all have the same ideas and pick out two people. They wouldn't believe the exact same things. I don't know why you're trying to use another book to interpret another book of the Bible.
I'll tell you. That's a great question. I'll tell you. Because churches don't have, in this case, churches are not like the historical evidence for an individual such as Jesus, okay? Churches are the byproduct of it. They're not the historical evidence of it. He and I both know that the historical evidence of the reason why Jesus is even memorable at all in history is because people at some point in time believed he was fulfillment of the scriptures. In this case, that would be the Hebrew Bible. So what we can't do is we can't say, okay, we're going to use the mentality of like modern churches where I would go and ask like a Methodist and then go and ask like a Baptist a question. And if they had different theological, hold on, please. Can I just,
The same church.
okay, even in the same church, like pew on the left side, pew on the right side, and you ask a person and they have different theological presuppositions. And then you're going to take that to mean, oh, and this is the fulfillment of blank, 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 and then quote the prophet. So what I'm saying is, here's what always happens. People want to be hyper skeptical whenever you're using your source material to prove why it is that someone believes something. So if you're going to go to the text, i.e. in this case, it's going to be Jeremiah and Isaiah, I don't know why you would use the analogy, like go into the left pew versus the right pew.
Because Jeremiah and Isaiah were two different people, just like the people in Ashland's analogy. And just like you wouldn't assume, like I have no reason to assume they held the same theology.
I have no reason to assume that they didn't. You're making the claim.
Well,
I
no,
don't understand.
until you can demonstrate that they do, I'm going to lack a belief that they do.
Okay, until you can substantiate that they didn't, I'm just going to lack the belief that you're correct.
Well, do we have any
That's
reason?
we're just at a stalemate
Was
then.
ancient in ancient Israel? Did everyone have the same beliefs about God?
No, absolutely not. But what we find, according to the Hebrew Bible, is that God would send these prophets, which did have the same theological position, according to the
Whoa,
book,
well,
according to the
that's
source that you're reading.
that's assuming that God's actually sending these prophets, which I don't believe.
Irrelevant. So that's what you're doing. You're now going from an internal critique to an external critique. Which one are you playing in? Internal or external?
Don't Jeremiah and Isaiah emphasize?
Wait, hold on. Could you answer that for me, Dalton?
No,
Wait, Dalton, I can't hear you. Your mic cut out again, sir.
no. my standard has always been that I treat the Bible like any other ancient text.
So then you would need to stay internal, not external. Here's what
No.
happens. When people get internal, their feet get held to the fire, then they jump out and they go external.
No, like no, I don't assume. I never assume. When I treat Isaiah, when I talk about Isaiah, I talk about what Isaiah believed, and that's it. And when I talk about
But how do you know what he
I,
believed?
the only way I can know what Isaiah believed is by reading what he wrote, or what his scribe
Right.
wrote for him.
Right. But then you would have to just kind of suppose you know what his words mean.
Yeah, we just go by the best inference based on what the text plainly says. Like that's
Correct. But you as an
willing
American,
and capable of doing.
right. But you as an American, do you believe that you can just know what 25 or 3,000 years ago ancient Judaism
No,
looked like?
which is why I depend upon scholars.
And scholars, they know, but you don't?
Oh no, I don't have the expertise. This is why I lean upon scholars. I lean upon
Correct.
people who
So-
know better than me.
Right. But the reason why they know is why? How do they know this information? It's either passed down or they study. You can't study like archaeology. You can't study theology. At best you have is archaeological evidence for like people believing in deities. But that doesn't necessitate that you know what they believed about the deity, i.e. everything that they believe. So it could be that the piece of wood was not like a divine, like a figure, but it could be that they actually did just believe that it was a god. Not that they would call the god down into.
Do you do this for other
inhabit the
ancient texts? If you had two Babylonian texts,
If I had to, yes, that's my. I'm trying
you
to
would
get.
you would just automatically
hold on.
assume that if you had two texts from a Babylonian source that they held the same exact theology.
No. That's not what I'm saying. I'm asking you specifically. Give me a meaningful reason that when both Jews specifically address a specific phraseology that has theological inferences, why you would ignore those theological inferences unless.
I don't. I just read each author for what they're saying, and I don't impose upon one author the words of another author.
Yeah, they're talking about like one is saying that there's an everlasting covenant, the other is saying I will make a new covenant. Why should we believe that these two things are they're going to agree on everything and use one to interpret the other? This doesn't even make sense to me, and I'm not even well versed on it. I
don't know why it doesn't. It makes like
because you're starting from a place where you think
What?
all of this is divinely inspired, and that they all have
No, it
they all
doesn't- it
and that
doesn't-
they all come and that it all comes from the same source, being God, and they share one theology. We just don't start with that assumption.
No, I understand, but you start with an assumption that the scholars that you're going to are giving you valid information that I guess because you just know that
Yeah,
they
because
just
when
know things
I fact
prior
check
to.
them, they seem to
Hold
line up with what the data support.
How would you know? That's what I'm asking. What's your criteria for fact
I
checking?
can go and look at primary
existed
sources.
3,000 years. Yeah, but something that existed 3,000 years ago, not whether there is like rocks or stones or anything with the markings, but what it is that they believed about those markings.
The only
theology.
source I have for what Isaiah believed is what Isaiah wrote.
Correct. And yet you ignore when two Jews write the same thing with theological.
No, I acknowledge what Isaiah said is what he believed, and I acknowledge that what Jeremiah said is what he believed. I just don't assume that they had the same theology.
And I say, based in the when you read it, I'm just repeating ourselves.
I would treat Isaiah and Jeremiah like I would any other ancient text.
Okay,
I'm not,
so now
I
you're
don't
just-
give the
that's
Bible
fine, that's
special.
fine.
I don't give the Bible special treatment.
That's fine. But the point is when they're writing about the same thing, you're ignoring that for some reason, because I guess it pleads back to the fact that it would be about Jesus, and then it would speak about a specific redemption that is more than just corporeal, that it's actually.
Because you'd have to demonstrate that they believed the same thing. We'd have to actually look at the text and see if they actually legitimately believed and said the same thing about the same thing in every single way.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking. What is your standard for doing that? You personally.
I would just read what the prophet wrote to see what it is he believed.
Correct. You would read it, but then now you have these words in your mind. How do you assess whether or not each individual prophet is theologically believing the same thing? What is your standard? What's your methodology?
They would just have to they would have to agree on every point.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not.
Check,
If
check,
one
check.
prophet
They agree on every point. Now, what does that mean to you?
If one prophet makes a statement about the last days, but the other one doesn't, I'm not going to assume that he believes that same thing.
I get it. But so basically you're saying if a prophet just happens to leave out like the word about, quote, the last days, but all the other inferences are the same, like you would just ignore it?
Yeah, I'm not going
So
to
it's gotta be
assume
like a
that. I'm
verbatim.
not going to assume that the prophet believes something if he doesn't say so.
But what I'm saying is if the contents of the chapter is the same, but one prophet just leaves out the word in the last days, you're just going to ignore that?
Why would I think it's about the last days?
Let's say it doesn't identify a time period at all, but the theological inferences are identical to the prophet, let's say Isaiah, which does identify that it's, quote, in the last days.
Well, that tells me that Isaiah believed it was in the last days.
Okay, wonderful. That's at least a starting point. So now you have Isaiah, who plainly tells you and believes it is in the last days.
And why
and then you
should
have
I
Jeremiah,
assume
who
that?
just doesn't identify when it is.
Yeah,
But
why
do
should I-
they speak about the same thing?
Yeah, why should I assume that Jeremiah believed the same thing that Isaiah believed about this thing?
Yeah, at best you could say is Isaiah or Jeremiah was maybe unsure about whether or not it was, quote, in the last days, but he believed theologically the same thing.
What?
Why should
No,
I
I,
believe
do, I
otherwise?
don't. No, I wouldn't just
Why
assume
should
that
I
he
believe
I
otherwise?
would no, because I'm not just going to assume they believe the same thing.
Okay, you're just repeating the same thing. I'm asking you for
And
more.
you're
I'm
also
asking you,
just
like,
repeating the same thing.
no, Dalton, I'm saying like if just because one leaves out maybe the phrase in the last days, but all other maybe say 9 points. There's a 10-point scale here, and all other 9 points would be the same. What's your distinction
Are the other 9 points exactly the same?
My friend, I just made up a number. It could be 5, could be a million. I'm just like giving you so you can kind of understand what I'm saying. Do you get what I'm asking? I'm asking for your methodology. You would then say,
my method here, Courtney. I'll put it very simply for you. My methodology in reading any book of the Bible is the same as I would for any other ancient text. I treat each author as their own individual person, and I assess what they believed based on what they tell me, and not based on what other people believed. It's that simple.
and I heard you like the first 5 times, but I'm asking you, how do you assess if they believed theologically the same thing?
They would have to express it exactly the same.
Okay, thank you. That's a methodology. So now you're looking for like verbatim, almost like verbatim fallacies that if one doesn't express it exactly the same, then they don't believe the same thing.
I'm just not going to believe that they believe something unless they tell me that they believe it.
You just danced around the question.
No, I'm telling you, unless the prophet Jeremiah tells me that he believes X, Y, and Z, I'm not going to believe that he believes X, Y, and Z. It's that simple, Courtney.
Because it's not written verbatim, word for word, identically the same.
He needs to at least tell me it's in the last days. He doesn't have to use the same exact words, but he needs to tell me it's in the last days.
Gotcha. So again, the theology could be the same, but because one prophet doesn't say in the last days, you're just going to say that they didn't believe the same thing, right?
Yeah, I don't assume people believe things unless they tell me they believe them.
Okay, gotcha. I feel like that was a non-answer, Dalton. It's okay to say no.
No, Mike, I don't believe people believe things unless they tell me they believe them. It's that simple.
Yeah, but the prophet's telling you he believes something. He just doesn't tell you like when.
And know exactly what does he believe.
Dalton, we're just trying to assess the methodology. You're really not understanding what I'm saying.
Courtney, I've made it very clear to you. My methodology for reading the Bible is the same methodology I use for any other ancient text.
That's a non sequitur to me. It doesn't logically follow, and I'll tell you why. Because I'm not dealing with any other text. I'm specifically dealing with the theology.
I don't give the Bible special credence.
I'm not asking for special. I'm asking for you to internally stay within the Bible, because you made a reference to colloquially the Bible. So here's the thing: what you're doing.
hold on. Just to let you know, what you're arguing for is like interpreting George Washington's words about independence by quoting Abraham Lincoln. They both talked about freedom. They lived in totally different
Is
eras.
that theological, Ashlyn?
Courtney,
Is that theological?
I'm giving you an analogy.
And the analogy is going to fall. Why?
It doesn't
Because
require if it's theological. Just let Courtney, let Ashley finish what she's saying.
Go ahead.
They were totally different eras with different issues. You can compare them, but you cannot use one to interpret the other. You wouldn't use Lincoln to explain Washington, and the same exact principle applies here.
Okay. Again, I disagree because it's not based in theology. When
I don't
both
care about
specific,
theology.
I know that's the point that I'm trying to prove. When both of these people, according to their writings, were called to be a prophet by God. So here's where now you're going to jump. I'm going to
That's
just
what they
predict
be-
it.
that's
You're
what-
going to
that's
jump
what they believed.
exterior. Correct. So now what you're doing is doing an
Yeah, again,
exterior
Courtney, you're assuming
critique
that they're getting their information from the same source. What's the evidence for that?
based in their own writing.
Okay, why should
Now
we
prove it
believe
wrong.
them? Why should
So
we believe
why
them?
should now that's what
I
you're
don't.
doing?
I
You
don't.
see what you're
Listen,
it's inconsistent.
Courtney. The default
and
position
you're
is
cutting-
not to
you
ass-
keep cutting
the
me
default.
off.
The default position is not
Why
to
is it that
assume.
every time I get closer
The
to
default
proving, you
position
cut me
is
off?
not. The default position is not to assume that Isaiah and Jeremiah are getting their information from a divine source. You would need to
Give me a
demonstrate
reason to
that.
believe not. Give me a reason why
Well,
not.
no. The default position is that they're not. You need to demonstrate that it is the fact.
No, it's not. That's a claim.
Yes,
That's a
because
claim.
God's existence is a positive
That's an
claim.
exterior claim.
Yeah, no, God can't. Isaiah,
You
can
are-
Isaiah,
you are-
can Isaiah and Jeremiah receive information
That
from
is an
Yahweh if Yahweh doesn't
exterior-
exist?
That is an exterior claim that you're
Yes,
making.
and if you
You're
want
doing
me
an
to believe
internal
that, if you want me to
critique.
believe, if you want me to
Dalton.
believe that, if you want me to believe that Isaiah and Jeremiah believe the same theology because they're receiving it from the same source, you're going to have to
And
demonstrate
you're doing that
source
based on what
actually,
they said, right?
And you're
Didn't
going
you
to,
say
and
you
you're going to
only
have to
believe what they
demonstrate,
say?
and you're going to have to
Dalton, didn't
assume
you
that that source exists.
Dalton, didn't you say I can only believe what they say they believe?
Yeah,
And
I
yet
believe
they
that Jeremiah.
Okay, then
I
then you have
believe
to,
that Isaiah
so now you
believed
can't
that he was
jump out.
getting
Can
his.
I please
I-
finish a statement, Dalton?
I believe that Isaiah was believed that he was getting his information from Yahweh. Doesn't mean it was.
Okay, again, so now you're doing an external critique. Every
Yes.
single time internally, when atheists, their feet are held to the fire, they immediately jump out and go to external. Well, I don't believe. Well, I asked you, Dalton,
Courtney.
what your method. Can I
Courtney,
please just finish
it's
the
quite
statement,
it's quite
Dalton?
simple. If you want me to believe that Jeremiah and Isaiah are getting their information from the same source, you're going to need to demonstrate that fact, other than just
Okay.
them claiming it.
Wonderful. Can I please finish my statement now?
If you can provide a reason for me to believe they're getting it from the same source.
Dalton, you specifically stated, I can only believe what they said about
Yeah.
what they believe. So specifically, now we're not dealing with whether that's true or not. That's irrelevant to
no-
the claim.
No,
So
it's
now
not
you
irrelevant.
have to-
I
It
accept
is
that
because
Isaiah.
we're trying to interpret their work based on their
accept-
words.
I
Can I
accept
please
that
finish?
I accept that Isaiah and Jeremiah believed that they were getting their information from Yahweh. I accept that. Isaiah makes a claim that he's getting his information from Yahweh. I accept that Isaiah really believed that. The question was, is it true?
It's irrelevant to what you told me your methodology was for believing what it is they wrote about what they believe.
Yeah, I
So
believe
now
that
what
Isaiah.
you're gonna
I
have to
believe that
do-
Isaiah really believed he was getting
Dalton,
his
if you're not
information
going to
from
let me
God.
finish, then there's no point in us speaking.
You seem to be missing the point entirely, Courtney.
I'm not missing the point. I'm using your own methodology against you, and I think you see that by now.
You're not using my methodology.
Sir, did you not tell me I can only believe what a prophet says about what it is that he
Yeah,
believes?
Courtney.
That is
When
not
Isaiah
how
said,
he said
Courtney,
that.
when Isaiah says that he's getting his information from God, I believe that Isaiah believed that. The question is, was he actually getting his information from Yahweh? I'm not going to assume that Isaiah and Jeremiah had the same theology, that they were receiving it from the same source, unless you can demonstrate that that source actually exists.
That is irrelevant to the
No, it's
actual
quite relevant.
claim.
It's
not
absolutely relevant to the
No, it's not,
conversation.
because because this is the only way that you can stay an atheist. Otherwise, you would have to concede that they're speaking about the
I'm
same exact thing.
no, I'm not
Because
going
then
to.
no one, okay, wait, do you
Courtney,
hold that
yes,
standard to,
yes, you're
hold on.
correct, Courtney. The only way for me to be an atheist is if I lack a belief in a God. And if
No,
you
that's
can
not what I
demonstrate
said.
that Isaiah and Jeremiah are getting their information from the same source, then I'll believe that they believe the same thing.
Okay, again, specifically when you're trying to interpret an author, if, according to you, if they do not write exactly verbatim the same exact thing,
I didn't say
then
verbatim.
yes, you did. Yeah, I said so.
No, I
A
didn't.
verbatim fallacy base. You did say verbatim. Let the
No,
record
you
show.
said verbatim. You're the
Play
yeah.
this back.
You're the only
Anyone could
one that
go and
said
read this
verbatim,
back.
Courtney.
Yeah, you're the
I'm
only one
really
who's brought up
getting sick of
verbatim.
this because it's
What are you
been
getting sick of? Me holding him to the standard that he gave me? That's why I.
goodbye,
Uh,
Courtney.
oh,
I'm not going to. The fact is that he literally said in this conversation that he would take that at least they express the same ideas. And then when he said that he would take Isaiah's for what he believed Isaiah, that he would believe Isaiah believed that, and that he believed Jeremiah believed that, but he does not believe that they actually came from God. You strawmanned that whole argument, and I'm getting sick of it because I actually had respect for you, and now I don't.
and just a summary for me, everybody. I could have gone on for much longer with that conversation, but yeah, she was getting cooked really good. But just to be clear, just to finally wrap up the whole conversation we were just having, and let the record show that I'm not the one that dropped Courtney, but that I'm not going to believe that Jeremiah and Isaiah believed the same thing and that they were receiving it from the same source unless you can demonstrate that that source, being God, actually exists and it's 100% relevant to the conversation. All right, we're going to move on to the next guest, I suppose.
And you straight up lied. I'm not going to go through the full hour
Ashlyn, this is not a good look for you, but let's see if I lied. Since you didn't play the whole clip, I'm going to show the portions that you didn't show. Let's get started.
Oh, I acknowledge what Isaiah said is what he believed, and I acknowledge that what Jeremiah said is what he believed. I just don't assume that they had the same theology.
And I say, based in the read it.
I would treat Isaiah and Jeremiah like I would any other ancient text.
Okay,
I'm not,
so now
I don't give the
that's
Bible
fine, that's fine.
I don't give the Bible special treatment.
That's fine, but the point is when they're writing about the same thing, you're ignoring that for some reason. Because here I asked for his methodology. Guess it pleads back to the fact that it would be about Jesus, and that it would speak about a specific redemption that is more than just corporeal. That it's actually
because you'd have to demonstrate that they believe the same thing. We'd have to actually look at the text and see if they actually legitimately believed and said the same thing about the same thing in every single way.
Okay, wait. In every single way, they said the same thing about the same thing in every single way. Eh, boo-boo. That's called verbatim. Yeah, that's what I'm asking. What is your
Methodology.
standard for doing that?
What's your standard or methodology?
I would just read what the prophet wrote to see what it is he believed.
Correct. You would read it, but then now you have these words in your mind. How do you assess whether or not each individual prophet is theologically believing the same thing? What is your standard? What's your methodology?
They would just have to agree on every point.
Verbatim.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not. If one prophet,
they agree on every point. Now, what does that mean to you?
If one prophet makes a statement about the last days, but the other one doesn't, I'm not going to assume that he believes that same thing.
So, in other words, if they don't speak verbatim, Dalton is not going to assume that they're saying the same thing. Ashlyn. So, no, ma'am. No, I didn't lie. You weren't tracking. Okay.
Yeah, I'm not. If one prophet makes a statement about the last days, but the other one doesn't, I'm not going to assume that he believes that same thing.
Verbatim. I get it, but
So basically, you're saying if a prophet just happens to leave out like the word about, quote, the last days, but all the other inferences are the same, like you would just ignore it?
Yeah, I'm not going
So
to
it's gotta be
assume
like
that. I'm
verbatim.
not going to assume that the prophet believes something.
Notice he said, yeah, I'm not going to assume. So in other words, if one prophet says in the latter days or in the last days, and if another prophet doesn't say that, but everything else is the same, he's going to assume that they're not talking about the same thing. And that's why I said the word verbatim.
If he doesn't say so.
But what I'm saying is, if the contents of the chapter is the same, but one prophet just leaves out the word in the last days, you're just going to ignore that?
Why would I think it's about the last days?
Again, verbatim, notice.
Let's say it doesn't identify a time period at all, but the theological info.
I'm going to post the whole thing on my YouTube channel so you guys can decide. Until next time, shalom.